Oop, I have to live here. Looks like the stream was deleted on Facebook. Try creating a new stream. Oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
Really? Sorry, a second, everyone who's watching live. I want to see if we can have it on Facebook because that would be nice, right? It says that we're. No, it says there's something oddly wrong here because it's actually checked off as if it exists. So I don't know. I something weird going on. I said go live. The stream is
It looks
try
like we're
creating
live
a
on
new.
YouTube.
All
Yeah,
right.
we are.
On YouTube, yes, and on Facebook, no. Something bizarre is going on Facebook. Okay. Well, sorry everyone on Facebook who can't hear me because you're not on because this isn't broadcast to Facebook for reasons I don't know and don't understand. But hi to everyone on YouTube, um, and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Podcast for today, November 7th, 2023. As always, I'm Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief, Avram Pelch, joined by Associate Editor Les Pounder, and our very special guest, friend of the show, and one of my personal idols, Jeff Geerling, who is a Raspberry Pi expert extraordinaire, manages to push his Pis to do things that nobody else can, especially in terms of doing things like using the PCI bus, trying to get graphics cards to run on it. Like I'm just always so in awe of what you're doing, and obviously you had some early access to the Pi 5 earlier than even we did, and
That
so
definitely
you
helps things.
yes. So
Yeah.
what have you been able to accomplish so far with the Pi 5?
Well, I've been right now. I'm just focused on getting my new office studio space built out because you can't see it around me, but like this is the only space that doesn't have stuff piled up. And so it's been hard to do all the testing I wanted to do on the 5. I decided it came at a rough time too. I had 3 trips in October, and that's when the Pi was happening, September, October. And so I had all the prep stuff. I was trying to get my videos lined up, and then they're like, hey, we can send you this early access hardware. And that turned into like I put down everything else and just got out. You can see usually in my YouTube stats, if you go to Social Blade or something, times when I'm working on another project, you notice views go down because I just don't have the same amount of time to spend on other things. I probably shouldn't say that because now everybody's going to be watching and being like, ooh, a new Pi's coming out because his views are down this month. But that's kind of how it is. But I've been focused on energy efficiency with the Pi 5. I just posted a blog post yesterday. I thought I had posted this earlier, but I completely forgot. But you can set one setting, and then when you shut down the Pi, it'll use like 99% less energy when it's shut down. And it's the same on the Pi 4. The Pi doesn't actually shut down all the way by default. You have to tell it like, yes, I really want you to shut down all the way when I turn you off. And there's a lot of things like that, measuring the efficiency for different tasks, like using the Pi for a VPN or the Pi for DNS or the Pi as a router. So that's been one of my things that I've focused on. I'm waiting right now for some of the PCI Express testing. I've tested a bunch of things on it. I've tested networking, Wi-Fi, storage, a couple of GPUs, but I had some issues with them, unrelated to the Pi's bus, I'm pretty sure. The problem is that the little connector I have, for those watching this, it's called an FFC, a flat flex cable.
Yep.
And this cable that I have is literally just straight traces on this connector. And that's not great for PCI Express because the speed of the bus is high enough that you need to have impedance matching, things like that. So for any electronics nerds and PCB designers and things, you'll know what that is. But the problem that creates is there's interference when I'm testing some high-speed things. So GPUs, NVMe drives like the one that I'm using here, some networking things, some storage things. I haven't gotten a SATA controller, so I can't install my NAS, my big super hard drive NAS. I want to redo the petabyte Pi project, but I'm holding off on that because I keep getting errors, and it's most likely because of this cable. And Raspberry Pi knows designing. I think they've already finished the design at this point. They're probably just testing and certifying and all that.
Yeah.
They're working on a new cable that's better than this one. And this is a prototype board that's also untested and not the best signal integrity. So I'm just waiting. I'm hoping that a few of the makers out there will be designing some boards that we could buy in the community to put on any kind of PCI Express device.
I've seen a few makers designing their own boards. Mirko Electronics,
Mhm.
Arturo, and another name that escapes me, not a third person. They've all been designing their own versions of
Arturo, Meyer
hats.
makes. It's just on Twitter. I think today I posted. There's somebody had a PCIe schematic for the Pi, like a reverse engineered one, and I mentioned a few of the people that have been working on this that I know of in the background. And it seems like right now on Twitter there's still a lot of that. Like if you follow these guys on Twitter, you'll see some of the ideas and thoughts that they've had.
Yeah.
So
Team
I'm
on.
excited.
That was the third person. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've managed to get it to run at PCI 3 speeds, correct? Even though it's supposed to be PCI 2?
Yeah. And what I'm pretty sure happened is they designed the chip, the SoC, to do PCI 3.0. But after, once you design and the real world are two different things. So once you get the board out in the real world and you're doing all your testing and you have Wi-Fi interfaces and all these other things right next to it on the board, you can only guarantee a certain spec in the real world. So the design of it is 3.0. In the real world, they can guarantee 2.0, but it's kind of like overclocking. Like they guarantee you're going to get 2.4 gigahertz because that's what they tested it out at. But some people could get 2.6, 2.8, 3.0, maybe in the future even higher. But it really depends on the quality of the actual chip you get. So I think on this board, it's safe to say it's a PCI Express 2.0 board, which is great. It's what we had with the Compute Module 4 in terms of external interface. But I think for a lot of people, you'll be able to upgrade it to 3.0, especially if you have a better cable. Mine kind of works at 3.0 with some things, and it doesn't work at all with other things, even at 1.0.
So how fast have you been able to get it to go?
With this SSD, which is a newer PCI Express Gen 4 SSD, it works at by 1 PCI Express Gen 3 at about 900 to 940 megabytes per second. So it's interesting. You'd think that Gen 2, Gen 3 is Gen 2 is 5 gigatransfers per second. Gen 3 is, I think, 8 gigatransfers per second. So it's not quite a doubling, but I did get about almost double the performance. But I also saw a few link errors and things. So that doesn't mean you're losing data. It just means that while it's transferring tons and tons of data, it spits out a little error in the messages, and then it redoes it, basically. It's kind of like Ethernet, where it sends a packet, and it's like, oh, there's a problem with that one, and it sends it again. But it would be nice to have a better cable so that I don't have those errors. It's nice not seeing errors when you're doing things like copying files across.
Because if you're doing like PCI 2 speeds, you're really basically getting SATA speeds. Is that fair to say? You're getting like
400 to 450 megabytes per second. So SATA could theoretically get up to like 550 or 600. But on PCI Express Gen 2, it's perfectly adequate for a SATA SSD or even NVMe drives. A lot of the cheaper ones don't go that much faster if you're copying over large files. So this one will handle faster speeds continuously because it has a cache on it and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of cheaper ones don't. They actually end up being like a USB thumb drive where you get really fast copies for the first 30 seconds, and then it just falls off a cliff, and you're copying it like 50 megabytes per second.
Yeah, no question about that. So what did you need to do to make it work? Like, was there particular software you needed besides having the board?
No, it's all built into the OS. There's overlays. You just say like, I want PCI Express Gen 2, 3, or 1. I haven't tried 4. I don't think it has anything for that, so I don't think it would work. But it'd be funny if they let that in there, and it's like you can try. I don't think it's
give it a go.
The one interesting mystery, which I keep forgetting to ask them about, is they're in the specs in the device tree in Linux and in their in the kernel that they have set up. There's actually 6 PCI Express lanes. There's 4 that go to the RP1 chip, and then there's 1 that goes to that external connector. But in software, it says there's another one, just this ghost lane. You don't see it on the device, so I don't know if it actually doesn't exist and they were doing that in testing or what that is. But maybe that's used for Wi-Fi or something. I have no idea, but I do want to ask more about that. Like, why is that defined but not in existence? or maybe that was like, oops, that was our first design, and we went with a chip that only had 5 lanes or something.
Yeah. So what else have you only done storage with the PCI slot, or have you tried any other devices?
I've done networking too, and with my 10 gigabit NIC, the problem is that a lot of 10 gig NICs are designed for by 4 or by 8 slots, and they design them in ways that they don't, like, you're supposed to be able to downrate to like PCIe Gen 3, and then you could get full speed, up to whatever it is, a gigabyte per second. But I can only get about 600 megabytes per second, or what is it? I can only get about 6 gigabits per second over the 10 gigabit card. So I think the Pi 5 will probably be good for 2.5 gig networking, or maybe even dual 2.5 gig networking. So there are some people out there who want to have a really low energy use router, or a really low energy use VPN for their home network or something like that. And the Pi 5 can handle that routing a lot faster than the Pi 4 and the Compute Module 4. So that's a valid use case. It's probably not quite as big because if you're talking about using 5 to 8 watts on a Pi 5, you could go up to like 8 to 10 watts and get an Intel little box that has multiple 2.5 gigabit interfaces. So I don't think that that's going to be a common use case, but I think it just shows how the Raspberry Pi has evolved to be more of a general purpose computer than in the past, to the point where you can build these things. And then what I like about that is that the people that make this software that's Intel only or x86 only might be kind of forced by the market to make their stuff work on ARM as well, which benefits me also because I work on these other ARM machines that have hundreds of cores and they're super fast and they have 128 lanes of PCI Express Gen 4. Like, if we can get all this software working on ARM, then all these different devices are enabled, except for Macs, at least if you're running Mac OS.
Yeah. So what other software have you tried on it? Have you tried any emulators? What are some of the things you've done to push the performance envelope?
Something else I've been trying lately is LibreElec and Kodi. So doing media playback. We went on our family vacation a few weeks ago, and I was like, we need to bring some things. The kids have never watched VeggieTales, and I just remembered they're kind of funny, kid-friendly comic things. And I had just ripped my old collection of the DVDs, and I was like, I need to throw these on there. And then I was like, well, I could test this on a Pi 5 and also see what it can handle. So I threw some of my 4K Blu-ray rips onto it, and I threw some of my 1080p stuff, and I made sure to put on H.265. I put in AV1 file that was 1080p. I haven't done all the testing yet, but I wanted to see what kind of media it can handle, because there's been a lot of people complaining like, oh, they ditched all the hardware stuff. Like, you can't do hardware encoding of 1080p H.264 anymore. It's software encoding.
Yeah.
I wanted to see some of the things with that, how that works out, because a lot of people use Raspberry Pis for recording camera feeds, or I'm going to start using one as an NVR later this year. So use it with Coral and Frigate and Home Assistant. And I wanted to just see how that all works, and it's handled it great. It handles 4K 60 FPS H.265, no sweat at all. It has hardware decoding for that. It handles 4K. I tested up to 30. I haven't tested 60 H.264. So that's fine for all my movies, because most movies aren't 60.
So this was in Libra?
This is LibreElec.
So you were, and was the Pi overclocked or standard?
No, standard clock.
So I'm curious, because this is one of the problems that I've still seen on the Pi 5, is that YouTube playback is still not very good.
Yeah, the problem with YouTube is they're using what is it, AV9, not AV, VP9, I believe, and they limit you to 1080p right now. If I open up Chromium on PiOS 12, it limits me to 1080p, and 1080p works fine, 1080p 60. But if you get up to 4K on YouTube, it can do some issues, because it's trying to decode the VP9. So VP9 and AV1 both they're more cumbersome codecs to decode. So that's why I'm still doing the work on that. The other hard thing is I don't have I have a computer that can do the AV1 encoding, but it's like sitting in my workshop under a bunch of stuff right now. So I don't have it plugged in. So I'm like, oh, I want to get a test file. So I grabbed like a 3-minute video at 4K 60 and started encoding it. It was like 0.8 frames per second on my Mac Studio. So it just takes time to make the sample files, get them over to the Pi, plug it in the TV, test it and all that. But I hope to do that pretty soon.
Yeah, what's your experience been like, Les, with playing YouTube?
Not fantastic. I played YouTube via Firefox, and performance was better than Chromium on the Pi 5. By no means was it stellar, but it was better, less drop frames. So Stats for Nerds was showing there was a lot less drop frames, and Chromium at times it just became a slideshow, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's been very disappointing. I was really hoping that with the faster Pi that would be resolved. Also, what I found, and I don't know if you guys tried this, is if the video itself is 1080, but your screen resolution is 4K, it becomes a slideshow, even though the source is 1080. I guess it's trying to upscale it or something.
Yeah, I know one of the goals that they have and haven't finished yet is to get it so that when you have the video content, it'll print it out through the GPU more efficiently than how it renders right now. Because PiOS 12, they have been making a big push for Firefox, which is, I like it because I don't use Chrome except for right now because StreamYard is like, your browser doesn't support StreamYard. It's like, my browser is not a bad browser. I don't know why you only support Chrome or whatever, but I like Firefox, and I like that they're pushing to get it on par with Chromium performance. And in some cases it's a little better, in some cases a little worse right now. But yeah, I've also done some testing with, I do most of my testing at 1080p resolution. So sometimes you see more problems sneak up when you're using a 4K monitor. But I've had 2 videos playing side by side, but at 720p, not a big deal. At 1080p, you start getting more stuttering and more issues.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's so do you think there's going to be a way that you can run a graphics card off of the PCI slot?
Yes. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to get some basic functionality at minimum. My goal is to always do stupid things,
It's not a bad goal.
Not stupid.
They're useless but awesome, and you can learn from it. So that's my main goal. Is I want to get display output. I want to get any kind of parts of the graphics card to work, especially machine learning or transcoding. Because my first goal would be, like, a lot of people just have an old graphics card sitting around. If they had an old PC, you could rip the graphics card out. A lot of the old graphics cards have hardware H.264, some have H.265. Some newer ones that are still pretty cheap have AV1 encoding. So if you wanted to set up a Raspberry Pi as a super tiny, cheap, an OBS streaming box or a transcoding box for Plex or Jellyfin, that is more possible if you can throw in a PCI Express card. I have a whole box full of them over there, and like I said, I'm waiting for that better cable, and I'm hopeful that by mid-December somebody will have something out that'll help us. And also over on GitHub, I have a website, the Pi PCI Express database. You could put a link in the description or something, but it's pipcie.jeffgeerling.com or pipci.jeffgeerling.com, something like that. And over there, in one of the threads, there's a user named CoreForge who I've worked with a ton, and he's like, if you think I'm like this, he's like up here in terms of his hardware knowledge and GPU stuff. And he and a few other people have really collaborated in that thread and in a few other places to get the driver issues worked out. And he has a Pi 5 now. I believe he's soldered his own connector to it, reverse engineering the pinout. And he has the console output already working. That took us like 3 months for the Compute Module 4. The Pi 5, its bus works better. It doesn't have the cache coherence issues. These are terms that most people probably never heard of. It doesn't have some of the issues that the Pi CM4 did. So I'm really hopeful that we can get these things worked out. And it'd be really cool if AMD or NVIDIA or Intel would kind of work with the community and be like, hey, we're going to make this a first-class citizen. Because sometimes it's just general ARM bugs. It's not a Raspberry Pi thing. It's just an ARM bug. Other times it can be that, the Pi has a little less memory than most systems, so that could be the issue. So we just have to figure all those things out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Les, what are some of the things that you've been able to do with Pi 5 that you couldn't do well with Pi 4?
Right now for me, it's emulation. So I love old retro games. So, I'm an old man. I love playing the old arcade games. But with a Pi 4, I would get up to possibly PS2 era games, but only a few of those would work correctly. With Pi 5, I managed to get GameCube working pretty well, Dreamcast working fantastically. So I had a great time playing Ikaruga, the shoot 'em up, which is impossible to play, but I had fun anyway. And some PS2 emulation was possible, a bit more than Pi 4. It's still really early days. The emulators are catching up with what Raspberry Pi have released. But the way it's looking, we're going to get a really good machine to emulate all the old classic consoles up to PS2 era, possibly even Wii. Lee PSP video did a YouTube video a few weeks back showing off Wii and GameCube emulation. Now, really, the Wii is just a GameCube on steroids. And it was okay. It was a little bit slower, but this was pre-release software. It wasn't tweaked or made any performance enhancement done to it. It was just a case of, here it is, see what happens. And it played pretty well. So Pi 5 in something like Picade Max, so Pimoroni's new Picade upgrade, which is coming out next year, you've got a fantastic platform for just reminiscing, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny. Like, I really, really want to see a Pi CM5, and I really, really want them to make the CM5 the same form factor as the CM4. Even if they make a newer one that has more pins or something, I want it to be backwards compatible, because I have in this pile of things that I am yet to work on. I have a Zame. Is it a Zame Gear? The Zame Gear retrofit for a Game Gear. I've always wanted a Game Gear, like, my whole life, and I never had one, but I had a friend that had one, so I was always jealous. Now I have one. I just haven't had time to put it together, but that's a project that we're, like you say, the Pi 5 will get us a bit further into the history of emulation. The CM4 gets us up to like N64, but even there's some games that are a little stuttery. So the Pi 5, I tried like Super Mario 64 and a couple others that do run smooth on a Pi 5. They're not quite smooth on a CM4, but they're pretty close. But on the Pi 5, it's like you're playing on the hardware.
Yeah, the CM4 struggled with Diddy Kong Racing, if I remember rightly, on the N64.
Mm-hmm.
I've not tested it on the Pi 5 yet. I need to, I'll dig that out and have a play. But talking of CM5, Arturo182 on Twitter yesterday was messing around to build his own CM5 using a Raspberry Pi 5 and some "this is a meme" board, he said, which broke out all the connections into something that the CM4 interface would work with. And that's clever. I mean, all right, it's never going to be a product, but it's just great fun.
Yeah. Well, and I've considered, this would be something very experimental, and I'm waiting for another Pi 5 to arrive. I have my prototype one, and another one that I bought is, I have my Magpie. I'm a subscriber, so I got the early thing, but that one is in a top secret location right now. I'll reveal more about that later. But I'm waiting for the one that I ordered from Pi Shop on day one to come, because I want to do some experiments and possibly even trying to tap into the RP1, pull it off, and use its PCI Express lanes. Forgo all the other connectivity, but basically build my own Pi with 5 lanes of PCI Express and see what I can do with that.
Nice.
So Jacob asks, have any of you tried SATA expansion cards with PCIe?
Yes. Yeah. So I put that information on the Pi PCIe database site. I've tested 2 cards, I think, so far. I tested 2 SATA cards and one of the Mega Raid SAS cards that does SAS, SATA, and NVMe. The Mega Raid one, it showed up and seemed to work, but it never actually identified, like, here's the card, you can use the drives. So I think that's down to the link issue with the cable I have. The SATA cards both came up, and the SATA driver is in the kernel. It's already there on the Pi, so you literally just plug in the card and boom, it's there. The problem is that I just kept getting so many errors. Like one time I got the drive to show up, and then I listed it. I got all the details. I started formatting it, and it started, and it got like 2 megabytes in and just died. And the nice thing is, the best thing about the Pi 5 is its link works the right way, where it doesn't just crash the whole Pi completely. Like it crashed the card and then the drive went away. Like that's how it's supposed to happen if you have a problem. So I could just, unplug and replug the drive and it was good. So it's nice for debugging to have that be the case, and not with the Compute Module 4 where it was just hard lock up and you had to literally unplug it and plug it back in to get it to reboot every time.
So my understanding is that you can run PS3 games on Apple Silicon using RPCS3. I wonder how easy it is to take something that was compiled for Apple M1 and attempt to run it on a Pi.
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of the optimizations are just ARM things. So that stuff could be ported easily. It depends on how much of it is based around like Mac OS's, if it's Swift and Objective-C and things like that. Those don't port as easily. So
right.
I haven't looked into that at all.
I mean, I would be really interested to see if we would be able to run a
Even if it's like
game.
2 frames per second.
Hey, listen, that's the goal, right? My motto is do it because you can, not because you should. Right. So I think
I've been following Lee PSP video on YouTube and ETA Prime. They seem to like leapfrog each other. They're always emulating like how many things can we emulate? So it's funny watching like one day one will do this thing and then you can tell like he saw that and so he did the other thing and then
competition.
I know they communicate in the background too.
Lee's latest one is the original Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the video last night and it doesn't work properly. It works fine on Mac hardware, but not on Pi.
So Brad was wondering what happened with the Turing Pi 2 board.
I actually have mine. I've been testing it because they're about to ship the RK1, which is an RK3588 chip on a compute module that's the size of an NVIDIA Jetson Nano. I have it over here. So they were supposed to start shipping in October, late October, but it's prototype hardware they're going to full production now. For me, I'm like, if a Kickstarter that I back comes out a year and a half later, that's better than never for me. The Turing Pi 2 had some shipping issues, but everyone that I know that has bought one got theirs at this point. And I bought it like probably 2 or 3 weeks after they launched the Kickstarter, and I got this board through that, the version 2.4 board. I would email them on Kickstarter. There's a way to do that, but there's also a Discord that's extremely active. I was in there talking about the RK1 bring up, and some of the employees or the contractors who work on the firmware and all that are there. So either email through Kickstarter or go onto the Discord, and you should be able to get some help.
Yeah.
Yep. So I mean, what would you like to do? What do you foresee yourself doing with the Pi 5 that you couldn't do with the Pi 4, Jeff?
For me, it's everything that I had trouble with PCI Express on the Pi 4. I don't have trouble with. I don't think I'll have trouble with. Some things like I can see that it's not going to have trouble, but I have the link issue, and it just keeps resetting itself, that kind of thing. So one of the first things I tried that I had so much trouble with on Compute Module 4, and we eventually gave up on, is the Google Coral TPU. It's the little chip that lets you do machine learning. I think it's like 4 tops or 6 tops. I don't know how fast it is for machine learning.
Somewhere I think I might have that on USB.
Yeah, they make a USB version, and that works great with the Pi. But having it in the PCI Express form factor means you can, slot it in and you don't have something hanging off your board. Yeah. There's also a company that I just talked to last week that makes, I think it's called Helios. They make another one. It's more expensive, but it's faster than the Coral. And they say it will work with this Compute Module 4 as well, but it'll also work with Pi 5. So it'll be interesting to see that. I think the big thing, though, is with all the extra speed, you can do the things that you wanted to do on CM4, but better. So I have my WireGuard home VPN is set up on a Pi, and I get like 200 to 300 megabits per second. I have a gigabit connection now, thankfully, after 9 years or 10 years with Spectrum, and they never upgraded me past 30 megabits. So now I have a gigabit upload, and I could use more of it if I have a faster Pi. So I haven't, like I said, I'm waiting on the Pi to ship, but that's another thing I want to test on it. WireGuard, see how fast I can get on my external VPN. If I can get, I've heard from one person, they got 700 to 800 megabits per second. So that's a pretty big improvement over 200 to 300.
Yeah.
So there's just so many things like that. And, you said retro gaming, the LibreElec. On the CM4, I never went past 1080p with any of my media stuff because it just got choppier. You have freezing and things like that. With the Pi 5, I've been able to do the 4K through LibreElec. YouTube is a different ballgame, but if you can encode your stuff at H.265, it's just butter smooth at 4K 60. And the Pi 4 wasn't always the case. And with the faster Wi-Fi, like the built-in Wi-Fi can give me 200 megabits now pretty reliably. The Pi 4 gave me about 90 to 100 megabits. So with that, if you're streaming high quality 4K content, you can do it over the network on Wi-Fi and not have an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's definitely a big improvement. I look forward to doing more kind of AI or image computer vision projects with it. Have you tried any kind of AI stuff with it?
No. I had one project I was going to do, and I just didn't get around to it with redoing my, when I had the redshirt Jeff detector, and I was going to do that again on the Pi 5. But my plan was to do it with the Coral TPU and show like really smooth facial recognition, because built in on the Pi 4 you get like 3 or 4 frames per second it can handle. On the Pi 5 I've heard it can do 8 to 10, but it's still kind of blocky. Like if you're looking at this video and I'm moving my hands, it would be like 1 and then 2 and then 3, you'd see the box moving like that. With the Coral it should be able to keep up at like 25 to 30 frames per second. So I'm hoping to do that still, but I think I'm at this point I'm just going to wait until I can see if I can get the Coral working, because there's so many libraries out there that work with it already. Zigbee on the Pi 5.
Yeah, David's asking if you tested Zigbee modules on the Pi 5.
I'm using the Home Assistant Yellow, and I just set one up last week at my office, and I posted a video on that yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, and it's adequate for me, so I'm happy with that. I haven't tried anything with automation with Zigbee or Z-Wave or anything on Pi 5. It should work. I don't see any reason why not. The USB stuff on the Pi 5 is like just as good as Pi 4.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is that every port on the Pi 5 has its own bandwidth. The CPU sometimes can't keep up with that. Like if you're copying from a SATA drive to a SATA drive through USB 3, the CPU is like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of data that I'm, because it has to go through the bus. Well, it goes from like the SATA drive to the SATA to the USB adapter, USB to the SoC, or to RP1, to the SoC, back to RP1, back to USB, back to SATA, back to the drive. Like that's the round trip there isn't amazing. And, that's one reason I like the NVMe storage, and I'm looking forward to the M.2 hat that Raspberry Pi is working on, because it's just so much faster and so much, well, the nice thing, it'll be more compact too. You don't have something hanging out of your USB port. Yeah,
it's going to use 2242 drives as well, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's one thing that's slightly disappointing. I think I'm pretty sure that some third parties will have. I've heard a few people talk about a HOB, a hardware on bottom, or somebody had a different acronym for it that was funny. But basically, underneath you could have a little cable go down underneath, and then it could have 2280 or even 22110. Really big drive if you wanted. But there's so many drives out there that are 2280.
That's the standard.
242.
Yeah.
That's the standard. You usually pay more money for the slimmer, for like the 2230s and 2242s.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of times those don't have the built-in DRAM cache on them, so they're slower because they're using the Raspberry Pi's own memory for its caching. So it can be a little bit slower, and it can consume more RAM.
Yeah, so we definitely want to run the 2280. Um, so yeah, I mean,
I'm sure that somebody will come out with a little 3D printed extension. You know, it's
yeah, how
it's just they didn't make the board that large physically. So someday
yeah,
they'll
how hard could it be? Um, so you and I both tested the Wi-Fi, and you found that the Wi-Fi was significantly faster. I found it was faster when near the router, but for some reason, maybe there was some interference going on. I was getting it a little bit slower when far from the router.
Yeah, Wi-Fi is funny. Like, for the past 3 years now, I've always tested every device right in this spot on my desk, and I always have it here. I have nothing else running within about 2 feet of it. Not even a light bulb or anything, because light bulbs, I have a little display here for my camera that microphones, audio equipment, almost anything nowadays can create some forms of interference. And there's so many more things now that do 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. The bands are just so full of stuff that it's really hard to test Wi-Fi well. And unless you have a hemianechoic chamber that's RF invisible, Faraday cage, unless you have
Yeah.
those tools, you can't give guarantees. My guarantee is that using the same test scenario that I've used for years, this is the difference. The hard thing is when I move to my new space, all that's out the window. Like, it's a new RF environment. The building
True,
actually
yeah.
has a brick wall in the back, and I built the studio with a couple extra walls in between, but it's not like RF can go right through that stuff, at least in certain frequencies. So it's so hard to make any absolutes. All I can say is it's twice as fast for me, and I always test everything again in the same spot, same place. So I retested everything on the Pi 4 in September, and I retested it all on the Pi 5, and I retested the Rock 5B, and I retested the Orange Pi 5. All that data was brand new going into that video that I made. So that's the same conditions. The variable is I could be standing here or I could be standing here. So, even that can cause a difference. The reflections off the water in my body. So, Wi-Fi testing is notoriously difficult, anything wireless.
Yeah, yeah, it is really challenging. But I mean, because
Yeah.
of the extra bandwidth, the extra connectivity bandwidth, you're getting faster Wi-Fi with this and faster USB with the same
Yep.
Wi-Fi chip and with the same USB 3.1 or whatever you want to call it, USB 5 gigabits.
Yeah, one
So
one thing that's interesting with the Wi-Fi that I haven't noted anywhere, I don't think publicly, mostly because I was still verifying it for the past few weeks, is if I have an NVMe drive plugged in, the Wi-Fi just goes away. Like, it acts like it's not even on the board. Any other PCI
Yeah.
Express device, no problem. It's only NVMe. So I've been investigating that. The hard thing is, like, there's probably 5 people outside of Raspberry Pi that do anything with PCI Express because there's no hardware available for it. And the only people doing stuff are the people that are literally like desoldering that connector and soldering their own connections and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was one thing I brought up. Like, this is weird. I think it's just me. And then I kept doing testing, and I kept like switching all the scenarios. And I tried on 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. I tried rebooting with different firmware versions on the Pi 5 and stuff. And every time I plug in an NVMe drive right now, the Wi-Fi just poof, it's gone. Like, doesn't get listed at all.
that was happening to me with USB boot drive in the beta before the final version of Raspberry Pi OS 12. Like the Wi-Fi would disappear if I booted off of SATA, off of a USB. You actually not SATA, any USB drive.
Yeah.
But
It makes me wonder if there's a software side fix for that.
but they fixed the USB
Okay.
version of this problem. And I remember, I forget who it was who said that there was a known problem. So I think it could be related, that if you're
Yeah.
using like a storage drive that's coming through this way, it somehow disables the Wi-Fi, which is not good, but hopefully can be fixed.
No.
But there's just so much great stuff going on. Anyway, we've talked Jeff's ear off. And I just really want to thank him, as always, for joining us. It's always just an honor and a pleasure to have you on.
Cheers, Jeff.
I love following the work that you're doing. I'm just envious of what you're able to accomplish. what is the best place where people can keep up with you? Would that be jeffgeerling.com?
Yes. Yeah, that's old school. I just have a website. That's what I direct everyone to, because I know that in 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years, jeffgeerling.com will still be there. I don't know if Twitter/X or Mastodon or YouTube or Instagram or any of the other things will be there.
Yeah, they might not be there more than a year.
Yeah, some of them very soon.
Some of them could be gone very soon. So, but HTTPS seems to have a lot of staying power. So we will be back next week at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time and 7 p.m. UK time with another wonderful guest. Thank you so much to all of you for watching and listening, and we'll see you then. Bye.